The House of Whispers and Ash, Chapter 1, The Flicker of Memory. The predictable rhythm of Evelyn's life in suburban Denver was a meticulously crafted sanctuary. At 70, she was a retired, respected professor of literature. Her days filled with books, quiet reflection, and the comforting presence of her daughter, Sarah. Yet, beneath the ordered surface, a persistent, unacknowledged shadow lingered. Since childhood, Evelyn had carried a vague, unsettling memory, a hazy image of fire, a sense of profound loss, and an unspoken emptiness. Her parents, God rest their souls, had been pillars of stoicism. After their move from Oregon in 1975, the past was sealed off, a forbidden territory. Conversations about Evelyn's early childhood, about the years before their abrupt relocation, were met with tight lips and averted gazes. She knew she had a younger brother, Liam, a ghost in their family narrative, lost in a house fire years ago. But the circumstances were shrouded in a thick fog of silence, the details buried under layers of unspoken grief and what felt like a deliberate forgetting. Evelyn had grown up with this silent decree, and over time, her own memories of that period had become fragmented, elusive, like wisps of smoke she couldn't quite grasp. One cool autumn evening, as Evelyn sat wrapped in a blanket, sipping chamomile tea, the local news flickered on her television. The report was grim. A series of arsons targeting old abandoned houses in small towns across Oregon. Evelyn barely paid attention, her mind drifting to a new book she was editing. Then, a familiar voice from the screen. The latest victim, an old 2-story property on Elmwood Street in Corvallis. Evelyn froze. The image on the screen filled her vision. The charred remains of a house, its roof collapsed, walls blackened, but its skeletal structure, the unique curve of its gables, the distinct shape of its burned-out porch, sent a jolt, sharp and electric, through her. It was as if a dormant wire within her had suddenly sparked to life. "That's my house," she whispered, the words escaping her lips before her conscious mind could process them. Her breath hitched. It was the house of her childhood, the one that had burned down all those decades ago, the one her parents had never spoken of. The report of its second fire, its final destruction, had inadvertently opened the floodgates of suppressed memory. A wave of emotions, hot and cold, washed over her. Shock, a chilling fear, but also a burning, undeniable urgency to finally understand. The fragmented images flickered, dancing at the edge of her awareness, whispers of flame and loss, promising to reveal a devastating truth she had unknowingly buried for a lifetime. The House of Whispers and Ash was calling her home, demanding its story be told. Chapter 2. Echoes in the Ashes. The whisper, "That's my house," hung in the air, thick with the weight of revelation. Evelyn felt as if a dam within her had fractured, releasing a torrent of fragmented, agonizing memories. The smell of acrid smoke, the blinding orange glow, the sound of splintering wood, distant screams. They flashed like lightning, swift and terrifying, leaving her breathless and disoriented. Her carefully constructed sanctuary of quietude suddenly felt fragile, threatened by the onslaught of a past she had unknowingly suppressed. Her daughter Sarah, finding Evelyn pale and trembling, immediately sensed the profound disturbance. "Mom, what is it? What happened?" she asked, her voice laced with alarm. Evelyn, still dazed, pointed a shaky finger at the television. "The house. It was my house. Our house. Before we moved to Colorado. Before Liam." Her voice trailed off, lost in the swirling vortex of her emerging memories. The subsequent days were a torment. Evelyn slept fitfully, haunted by nightmares of fire and loss. During waking hours, the fragments of memory continued to surface, often triggered by the most mundane things: the scent of burnt toast, a distant siren, a specific shade of red. These flashes were terrifying, yet exhilarating, fueled by a desperate need to piece together the fractured narrative of her early life. She knew with chilling certainty that simply suppressing them again was no longer an option. "I have to go back, Sarah," Evelyn declared one morning, her voice firm, resolute. "To Corvallis. I have to see it. I have to understand." Sarah, practical and protective, initially hesitated. "Mom, are you sure? This could be incredibly painful. Maybe we should consult with someone first." "No," Evelyn interrupted, her eyes burning with an unshakable conviction. "I've lived with this silence for too long. This is my chance, my only chance. I need to face it." Seeing the fierce determination in her mother's eyes, Sarah relented. She knew her mother well enough to understand that this was not a fleeting impulse, but a deep-seated need. "Okay, Mom," she said. "I'll come with you. We'll face it together." The drive to Corvallis, Oregon, was long and somber. As they approached the town, Evelyn felt a strange sense of familiarity, a pulling sensation towards the place she had unknowingly fled decades ago. The air grew heavy with anticipation. They arrived at Elmwood Street. The address was correct. Standing before them were the ruins of what had once been Evelyn's childhood home. The sight was even more devastating in person. Blackened timbers jutted towards the sky like skeletal fingers. The scent of lingering ash hung heavy in the air. This was not the beautiful, vibrant home of childhood dreams. It was a ghost, twice ravaged by fire. As Evelyn stepped out of the car, a powerful, overwhelming wave of memory washed over her. Not a flash, but a cascade. She saw her younger self, a small girl with bright eyes, running across the lawn. She heard Liam's childish laughter, saw his tiny hand reaching for hers. The ghost of a swing set stood in the yard. The pain was excruciating, physical, but also profoundly clarifying. The suppression was breaking. The truth, in all its devastating glory, was finally beginning to surface, whispered from the echoes in the ashes. The house of whispers and ash, ravaged by fire, was finally ready to tell its tale. Chapter 3: Searching the Embers. Standing amidst the charred remains of her childhood home, Evelyn felt a strange clarity, a painful yet liberating sense of purpose. The smell of ash and damp earth mingled with the faint, sweet scent of blossoming jasmine from a nearby garden, a jarring juxtaposition that highlighted the brutal beauty of memory. Her initial shock gave way to a focused resolve. She had to unearth every truth, every hidden detail. Sarah, ever the pragmatist, immediately set about researching. They visited the Corvallis Public Library, a quiet, unassuming building that held decades of local history. Old newspaper archives, brittle and yellowed, became their primary source. Information about the 1975 fire was surprisingly scarce. A brief article mentioned a tragic residential fire, attributing it to faulty wiring, and confirming the death of a young boy, Liam Miller. The investigation was swiftly closed, deemed an accident. This lack of detail, the quick conclusion, immediately raised Evelyn's suspicions. Her parents' silence, once a source of confusion, now felt like a desperate attempt to bury more than just grief. "This is almost too neat, Mom," Sarah observed, pointing to the terse official statement. No follow-up, no details about the family, nothing about the neighbors. It's like they wanted to erase it. Evelyn remembered a name from her fractured memories: Johnson, a local sheriff or firefighter. They inquired at the current police station. After some digging, they located a retired Sheriff Johnson, now in his late 80s, living in a small farmhouse outside of town. He was frail, his memory occasionally wavering, but his eyes held a distant, weary knowledge. Sheriff Johnson remembered the Miller family. "Good people," he rasped, his voice gravelly with age. "Tragedy, that fire. Shame about the boy." He spoke slowly, with long pauses. "Your mother, bless her heart, she was in shock, couldn't say much, just kept asking about the boy. And you, little Evelyn, you were found outside, just outside." He sighed, shaking his head. "Told us the wiring was old, nothing else to it." Evelyn pressed him gently. Was there anything unusual? Anything suspicious? Johnson hesitated, his gaze drifting towards the window. "Well," he began, his voice barely a whisper. "There was some talk. Neighbors. Folks always had their disagreements, especially the Andersons. Old man Anderson. He and your father had a bit of a feud going. Something about a property line dispute years back. Nothing came of it, of course. Just talk." He waved a dismissive hand, but Evelyn felt a chill. The mention of the Andersons, a name she vaguely recalled from her childhood, snagged at a loose thread in her memory. Next, they sought out Mrs. Gable, an elderly woman who still lived next door to the burned-out lot, her house a mirror image of Evelyn's childhood home. Mrs. Gable, with her sharp eyes and even sharper memory, remembered everything. "Oh, the Millers!" Mrs. Gable exclaimed, her voice thin but clear. "Such a lovely family, that poor little Liam. A bright one he was, always exploring, always looking for things. Before the fire, he was acting strangely. He told me he found something, a secret, something about bad men. I thought it was just a child's imagination, playing games." Evelyn's blood ran cold. "Bad men? What did he mean?" Mrs. Gable wrung her hands. "He just kept saying he knew who did it. I thought he meant who knocked over his toy truck, bless him. But then the fire. Oh, it was terrible. Liam was so brave. He tried to get you out, little Evelyn. Pushed you through the kitchen window, he did, shouting something about the smoke not being right. Then he didn't come out." The words struck Evelyn like a physical blow. Liam pushed her out? The smoke not being right? Not an accident. Not faulty wiring. This was a deliberate act. The pieces of the puzzle, long scattered in the embers of her memory, were slowly, terrifyingly beginning to coalesce. The House of Whispers and Ash was no longer just a memory. It was a crime scene, and Liam, her little brother, had been a hero. Chapter 4, The Unlocked Chamber. The words of Mrs. Gable reverberated in Evelyn's mind. "He knew who did it. Pushed you through the kitchen window. The smoke not being right." The casual dismissal of these chilling details by Sheriff Johnson now felt like a deliberate oversight, perhaps even complicity, rooted in the prevailing desire to quickly close a painful case. The trauma, once a shapeless void, was now taking on terrifying contours. Back in Denver, Evelyn began working with Dr. Ben Carter, a compassionate and experienced psychologist specializing in post-traumatic stress and repressed memories. Carter explained the brain's protective mechanisms, how it could cordon off traumatic events to allow a person to function. "Your brain built a wall, Evelyn," he said gently, "to shield you from something it deemed too painful. Now that wall is crumbling. will go slowly, at your pace. Through guided imagery, dream analysis, and careful conversation, Dr. Carter helped Evelyn navigate the labyrinth of her subconscious. Fragmented images solidified into vivid scenes. The smell of gasoline became distinct from the smell of burning wood. The figure of a man, lurking in the shadows. One session, Evelyn gasped, her eyes wide with a dawning horror. Liam, he was obsessed with finding something, a secret or treasure in the house. He said he knew who did it, but he couldn't explain. He was so little. He just kept whispering about the man with the mean eyes and the funny smell. He said he was going to show me his secret place. Meanwhile, Sarah, driven by her mother's newfound clarity, revisited the online newspaper archives. She dug deeper, cross-referencing names and addresses. She found a series of articles from the early 1970s detailing a bitter land dispute between Evelyn's father and their neighbor, Walter Anderson. The same Old Man Anderson Sheriff Johnson had vaguely mentioned. The dispute had escalated, involving threats and vandalism. The property line, it turned out, ran right through a valuable section of timberland that Anderson coveted. Sarah found a police report from 1974 where Evelyn's father had accused Anderson of trying to intimidate him into selling, including veiled threats about making things hot around here. The fire was in 1975. The coincidence was too striking to ignore. During a particularly intense session with Dr. Carter, Evelyn broke through. The memory was sharp, clear, and devastating. She was playing hide-and-seek with Liam. Liam, mischievous and giggling, had gone to hide in their small, dilapidated woodshed behind the house, his favorite secret spot. Evelyn had been counting. Her eyes closed. Then she heard a strange, metallic, clinking sound, followed by a muffled voice. She opened her eyes. The shed door was ajar. She saw a man, a shadow against the setting sun, emerge from the shed. He carried a small, red can. He glanced back, his face contorted in a sneer, eyes burning with a chilling malevolence. It was Walter Anderson. And then, the fire. The immediate explosive rush of flames from the shed, spreading quickly to the dry wooden house. Liam's terrified scream from inside. Evelyn, paralyzed by fear. Liam, suddenly appearing at the kitchen window, his small face streaked with soot, his eyes wide with terror, and a desperate plea. Evelyn, bad man, not accidental. He put it, the treasure in the wall. He shoved her through the window, shouting, "Run, tell, the treasure, it's the proof." Then, a rush of smoke, a collapsing beam, and Liam was gone. The treasure was a children's concept for an important secret. What had Liam hidden? Sarah, hearing this, realized. The shed. You said he loved that shed. They immediately returned to Corvallis. The shed, long abandoned and decaying, was mostly rubble from the second fire, but its foundations still remained. Driven by Evelyn's recovered memory, they frantically sifted through the debris. They found a small, hollow space in the remains of the old shed wall, covered by a loose board. Inside, tucked away, was a rusted tin box, miraculously preserved from both fires. Inside the box, amidst a few child's drawings, was a single, charred piece of paper. It was a crude drawing by Liam, depicting their house on fire, and beneath it, a child's shaky scrawled words, partly burned, but legible. "Bad man, Mr. Anderson. He said he burn us." By Saul. And beneath that, a tiny, meticulously drawn map leading to a specific, hidden part of their old house's foundation, marked with an X and the words, "Hidden Proof." The treasure was Liam's desperate attempt to preserve the truth. a final act of courage. The unwritten story was no longer a mystery. It was an unlocked chamber, revealing a cold-blooded crime and the horrifying sacrifice of a brave little boy. Chapter 5: The Unwritten Truth. The discovery of Liam's hidden tin box. With its charred drawing and scrawled confession, sent a shockwave through Evelyn and Sarah. The raw, desperate truth of a child's final act of bravery, a desperate attempt to save his sister and expose a heinous crime, was overwhelming. The memory, once a source of terror, now brought forth a profound sense of loss, but also an unwavering determination for justice. The X on Liam's map led them to a specific section of the old house's foundation, a spot Evelyn now remembered as a loose stone near the back porch. The area was even more destroyed by the second fire, but with careful effort, they managed to dislodge the stone. Beneath it, nestled in a small, dry cavity, was a small, tightly sealed glass jar. Miraculously, it had survived both infernos. Inside the jar, preserved by the airtight seal, was a single yellowed photograph. It was a snapshot of their property line, taken by Liam's father, likely as evidence in the land dispute. But the crucial detail was that in the background, subtly but unmistakably, stood Walter Anderson, in the very act of pouring a liquid from a red can near the old shed. The date, faintly visible on the back, was just days before the fire, and with the photograph was a small, tightly folded piece of paper, also preserved. It was a note written in Evelyn's father's hand, detailing the growing threats from Anderson, specifically a chilling threat made just weeks before. Anderson swore he'd burn us out if I didn't sell. The final piece of the puzzle, the motive, the perpetrator, the proof. Liam, in his childlike innocence and keen observation, had somehow witnessed Anderson, perhaps even overheard his threat, and had meticulously gathered the evidence, hiding it in his secret spot, a testament to his innate intelligence and bravery. He hadn't just tried to save Evelyn, he had tried to expose the truth. Armed with these undeniable artifacts, Evelyn and Sarah immediately contacted the Corvallis Police Department. Detective Miller, no relation, a diligent officer, listened intently to Evelyn's recovered memories, examining the evidence with a mixture of skepticism and growing intrigue. The old police report, the contradictory statements from the original investigation, Sheriff Johnson's vague recollections, and now the physical evidence, it painted a compelling, chilling picture. Walter Anderson, now in his late 90s, was still alive, living in a nursing home on the outskirts of Corvallis, frail and suffering from advanced dementia. While a direct prosecution might be impossible, the revelation of the truth was paramount. Detective Miller reopened the case. He re-interviewed Sheriff Johnson, who, confronted with Evelyn's memories and the new evidence, visibly paled. He admitted he had felt something wasn't right, but had been pressured to close the case quickly by higher-ups who wanted to avoid a messy, drawn-out investigation involving a prominent local family, the Andersons. The small town's desire for peace had buried a terrible truth. The official report was amended. The cause of the 1975 fire was changed from accidental to arson. Walter Anderson was named as the perpetrator. While he would never face legal justice in his current state, the truth was finally etched into the official records. For Evelyn, the revelation brought a profound, complex sense of liberation. the shadowy burden she had carried for decades lifted. Her memories of Liam were no longer intertwined with a terrifying, unexplainable void, but with the poignant image of a brave, insightful boy who had sacrificed himself to save her and expose a killer. She grieved for him anew, but this time it was a grief unburdened by confusion, a pure and honest sorrow for a true hero. She understood her parents' silence too, their desperate need to protect her from a brutal truth, to shield her from the knowledge that her brother had been murdered by a neighbor, and that they had been forced to leave their home had led them to bury the past. She finally forgave them, realizing their silence was an act of profound, if misguided, love. Evelyn and Sarah returned to Denver, their bond irrevocably strengthened by their shared journey into the past. Evelyn could finally speak of Liam, of her childhood, of the home that had both nurtured and traumatized her. Her memory was no longer a fractured landscape, but a complete, if painful, narrative. The house of whispers and ash had, at last, spoken its truth, and in doing so had healed the deepest wounds of her past. The unwritten truth had found its voice, and a new chapter of peace had begun. Chapter 7. The Lingering Light. The public acknowledgement of Walter Anderson as the arsonist, even if only through an amended police report, brought a quiet sense of triumph to Evelyn. Justice, though delayed and imperfect, had finally touched the memory of her little brother Liam. The shadows that had veiled her childhood for so long began to recede, replaced by a lingering, warm light. Evelyn found a profound peace in being able to openly speak of Liam. She created a small, beautiful memorial in her garden, a space dedicated to his memory, where she placed a small stone carved with a crescent moon, a symbol of his bright, brief life. She would often sit there, telling Sarah, and later, Sarah's children, stories of Liam, his mischievous grin, his insatiable curiosity, his brave, protective spirit. The once taboo subject of their past was now a cherished, shared history, a testament to resilience and the enduring power of family. Dr. Carter continued to support Evelyn, helping her process the layers of her trauma. He emphasized that healing wasn't about erasing the pain, but about integrating it, understanding its origins, and finding strength in survival. Evelyn discovered an inner resilience she never knew she possessed, a quiet strength born from facing her deepest fears. Sarah, who had witnessed her mother's transformation firsthand, found herself inspired. She became an advocate for victims of trauma, particularly those whose memories had been suppressed. She spoke out about the importance of mental health support and the long-term impact of unaddressed grief. Her relationship with Evelyn deepened immeasurably, evolving into one of mutual respect, profound understanding, and an unbreakable bond forged in the crucible of their shared journey. The property in Corvallis, the site of so much pain and now so much truth, was eventually sold. Evelyn made sure that a small, permanent plaque was placed on the new foundation, commemorating Liam's bravery. It was a subtle, respectful gesture, ensuring that his sacrifice would not be forgotten by the new inhabitants or the community. Evelyn often reflected on the strange path her life had taken. A simple news report, a flickering image on a screen, had been the catalyst for an extraordinary journey into her past. It had been painful, terrifying at times, but ultimately, it had been a journey towards liberation. She had not only found the truth about her brother's death, but had also rediscovered parts of herself that had been lost in the decades of silence. Her parents, though long gone, were finally understood. Evelyn held no bitterness, only compassion for the overwhelming grief and fear that had led them to seal off their past. She carried their love, now unburdened by unspoken secrets. As Evelyn watched her grandchildren play, their laughter echoing through her peaceful garden, she felt a quiet fullness in her heart. The house of whispers and ash, once a symbol of burning trauma, was now a distant memory, replaced by the lingering light of truth, forgiveness, and the enduring strength of a family healed. The journey had been long, the memories often agonizing, but the destination was peace. The unwritten truth had finally etched itself into the annals of her life, not as a scar, but as a testament to the unyielding spirit of survival and the profound, eternal bond of family.